special report on The Glass House with Ben and Lynley Mandrell. I'm your host, Jennifer Rash, and joining me from our TAB team is co-host Margaret Colson. Ben and Lynley, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a great honor to be on the show.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, The Glass House is a Lifeway Christian Resources podcast hosted by Ben and Lynley, where they deal with challenges, I would say, that ministry leaders and their families often face. So you're 4 episodes in about now, I think, and already got your feet wet, doing well, know what to do, you're pros at the hosting. Tell us a little bit about what you've learned so far, and then we'll get into some of the topics that you've been covering.
Yeah, it all started one day. Lynley and I were on a walk. Through COVID, we've started doing a lot of walking together. It's been great for our marriage. And we were just talking about the number of pastors and wives we knew that were struggling with some personal issues as they were also trying to lead their church through this time of crisis. And Lynley said, it really is hard living in the glass house. And I remember saying, that's a really good title for a podcast or something. So it was her idea. I got to give her all credit. But we were also going through a season of our own marriage where the more we talked out loud about some of our own challenges, the more we sensed that we were not alone. And so dealing with emotional issues in the life of the pastor and pastor's wife as you're trying to lead a local church is difficult. And we feel like we help them by just exposing some of these things and talking about them.
I mean, one thing that's been interesting is that this has been a surprise for us because not even that long ago, a church here in Nashville had asked us to come speak on soul care, which, I mean, this was like in the height of our counseling journey ourselves. I mean, because we just were so unhealthy. And so we came in there and said, you can't imagine a less equipped couple to be speaking to you guys on soul care than us right now. But let us just tell you what we are learning. Like, this will be aspirational, not actual, but here's what we're learning. And what was interesting is that it connected so deeply that we were not prepared for, and, had so many conversations afterwards. And so then we were thinking, goodness, I mean, the what churches are going through right now, there's a lot of emotional unhealth that is not talked about. And so how can we talk about that in a way that kind of brings it to light?
Well, in the first podcast, you did share quite personally about your journey, about your marriage. Were you reluctant to be that vulnerable to the audience that would watch this podcast?
It depends who you ask.
No, he was more than I am. But for me, if we can't be honest about it, then we can't help others. And so, I mean, I just think, let's just be completely honest about what's going on, and maybe our brokenness and our story will help someone else. But it has been so surprising to me, the amount of people who have said, that must have taken a lot of courage. And I mean, I'm like, not really. Like, we just told our story, and we're all broken and we're all sinners, so we can just share it.
Well, we have learned that vulnerability and brokenness is what draws people to you. And as people get to know you and your story, it's the broken places of your story that people really want to connect with you. That's where the pain is felt and where connection is felt. So it is scary to be vulnerable, but there's always the reward of intimacy that's on the other side of it.
And again, that now that you're doing it, that sounds easy, but being the president of Lifeway Christian Resources and knowing that you have all of these employees that are going to go, oh, he's not perfect. He and Lynley have struggles, and their home life is like mine, wasn't a little bit of a challenge to work through?
Yeah, it was for my pride, but it hasn't been practically. Honestly, I feel like I have gotten closer to people in the organization as I've been real about some of the challenges of leading a church that we love to come to an organization in a state of transition and trouble. And that would have been hard for anybody. And it was very hard on me. It was very hard on us. And just talking about the difficulty of transition and working through new seasons of life, I think has created more connections with our employees. And I think maybe made us a little more relatable.
And so then are you able to help other leaders, maybe, and pastors who are struggling with just being real with themselves? Sometimes they won't admit to themselves or with their families. Is that giving you an in?
I think that's the goal. I mean, that's what we want. And, we talked about this, I think on the show, one episode, is that the goal is that the underrepresented group, the person who is struggling, can maybe latch on to this and say, there are other people out there struggling. And so they feel almost a connection with us because they know they're not alone.
I think the one of the biggest surprises of this has been the impact on the pastor's wife. We talk a lot about pastors, but honestly, the pastor's wife gets a lot less attention, but the role is so critical to the life of the church. And she struggles, and she has her own struggles. And as we've heard from lots of pastors' wives, it's been encouraging to know that that's an area we need to dig into. Mm-hmm. We had one pastor's wife who'd been in ministry for 30 plus years, said that she always felt in the church like the invisible woman. That she was there to be supportive, that she was there to support her husband, but who she was and what she thought didn't matter. And I think as we can begin to talk about some of those unique challenges of each of these roles in life of the church, they can feel encouraged that they're not alone in it, and there is encouragement to be found in others.
Lynley, did you want to respond to that?
No, I'm good. Okay. I'll chime in.
Okay. Ben, so when you came to Lifeway, it was in a state of transition, to put it nicely, and the transition did propel your personal lives into something of a crisis. But yet, I have read that you said it was one of the best decisions that you ever made. Yeah. How can those two be this? Work together? How can it be one of the best decisions that you've made?
Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to?
Well, I mean, you asked him, I know, but I can answer quickly.
Sure.
Maybe not super quickly, but the thing is that we didn't realize our unhealth in pastoral ministry. And so why this has been terribly painful for us, what we did realize is that we were relying a lot more on the identity aspect of being leaders and the affirmation of people and our own self-reliance. And so when we come, and it's different in a corporate ministry, you don't have a congregation that's always telling you that was a great message, or that kids ministry event was really great. Then you have to just begin to identify who you are in Christ alone. And so for us, that was like, we just kind of came to this crisis moment where we realized that we weren't healthy in that. And so that's why we say it's been the best thing for us, because we've had to realize our own unhealth. And so, I mean, sometimes we laugh because we've gotten to this point of feeling really healthy, and it's kind of scary. I'm like, we should still keep going back to counseling because we don't want to forget the pain of what we went through. But now you can answer. I'm sorry.
No, I think we all have those moments where, we relate to Peter walking outside that boat and feeling a little overwhelmed by the size of the waves. And there's no doubt that coming to Lifeway in and of itself was a challenge, but then you pile COVID on top of that, and churches not gathering, stores closing, and Lifeway. There's large segments of Lifeway that are very healthy, but there were some things that really needed attention, and all of my attention went to those issues. And I essentially emotionally abandoned Lynley for a while as I was trying to get that under control. And through that struggle, learned so much about what intimacy is. When we planted the church together, we really did it together. So any opposition we experienced, and we experienced a lot, was ours. But when we got to Lifeway, I really try as I may I tried to take it on my shoulders, and was really walking alone in it. And it wasn't something that drew us together. It was something that was tearing us apart. So many pastors and wives relate to that he's carrying the burden of the church. He's not involving her. They're not doing it together. And in that case, church can tear your marriage apart if you're not trying to lead and minister together. So we learned so many lessons about that I hope we never have to repeat again.
Share more about vulnerability and intimacy and how all of that works.
Yeah, one of the counseling sessions, we learned that vulnerability is when you give people information they could use to hurt you. That's making yourself vulnerable. And so there's a difference between being transparent, which is just honest, and being vulnerable, which gets to the personal places. So we've learned that brokenness and vulnerability is a big piece of what it means to be human. what it means to be a pastor, what it means to be a president, and that we can't ignore our brokenness and fragility, but really embrace it. And so things like sadness, shame, guilt, these emotions that we experience as human beings, if we ignore them, we ignore them to our own peril. And over the counseling journey we've been on, it's been really about training ourselves to understand what those emotions are and how to process them together.
Yeah.
And I'm way less willing to do that just naturally than Lynley's personality. So I've had to be helped. So in the first episode, I confessed that when we first started going to counseling, I was convinced that she'd kind of gone crazy and that we needed to tell her that, and we would be done in 3 or 4 sessions.
Nice.
And about the 7th or 8th session, when most of the time had been devoted to him asking me questions, I started to figure it out. Like, wait, maybe I'm the problem.
Maybe so. No.
You were just getting him there, right, Lynley? You're just helping him find.
It was definitely both in. Go ahead.
Lynley, when you were in Colorado, you worked alongside your husband in the church plant, and you actually had a staff position with the church. You moved to Nashville. He's got this big job, big ministry, national spotlight, but you're on the outside kind of looking in. Do you feel at this point that Ben's role at Lifeway is more of a partnership between the two of you?
I do at this point. But I mean, that was definitely, I mean, you just wrapped up in one sentence what happened, in that because we had been on staff together when we took the job at Lifeway, naively, we just said, we're going to come and we're going to do Lifeway together, because we just were only in the pastoral ministry mindset, and corporate ministry is very different. And so that was what was so hard. But I mean, even doing projects like the Glass House, it's a Lifeway podcast, and that has helped a lot of feeling like I am included. There have been staff turnovers at Lifeway. I mean, just with anything that is new, any leader that's new, they bring in some new people, and that has also helped me to feel a part of it, because when those people are new, they have embraced me. And so that has also helped a lot. And I think just time. I mean, I think Ben and I are very impatient people. And so we are admittedly like, we want things to change quickly. And so when we were used to a church plant that's like a speedboat, I mean, you can change it however you want to. And then we came here, we did not understand how long things take to change. And so a lot of that was I was just naive to it and ignorant to it. And now looking back after 2 years, think if I had had a better mindset, it probably wouldn't have been as bad of a problem. Better understanding.
I think we've adjusted our expectations. Lifeway is on a new trajectory, and we're really excited about the trajectory, but it takes time for things to take flight. So a lot of the things we're bringing to Lifeway now, and a lot of the changes we're making, I think that will be a benefit to the local church. It's sometimes 2 to 3 years before the fruit is on the tree. And so we're just learning to embrace that this is a different kind of leadership, where it doesn't rest on Sunday to Sunday. It's more year to year, and it takes time for things to develop.
I think about
sorry.
Go ahead.
I said, in some ways that's been really nice, because sometimes in church ministry, you feel a lot more pressure that, the church might fall apart if you're gone for a little bit of time. But with that is the advantage of a slower moving business, is that, if we have to take off a day or two here and there, it's okay. I mean, the thing is not falling apart. So that's been fun too.
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of what I was going to say was, what you're talking about. I think it's interesting to think how you can relate that back to the pastorate and to ministry leaders, and even what you're learning, that maybe some of the stories we hear where new pastors come in and to an established situation, and they have the energy that you were describing and wanting to move things really quickly. And then sometimes it doesn't, work out so well.
Right.
Yes.
And I think, are you bringing a fresh resource to Lifeway that maybe has always been there, but maybe just giving it a look that you're helping the leaders in the areas that they're going to be struggling with, whether it be relationships or whether it be in their leadership or all of these different pieces?
Yeah, the closing of the bookstores was a massive change in the focus for Lifeway.
Okay.
I keep saying it this way. It wasn't 174 bookstores. It was 174 counseling centers. People were coming into those stores that were having marriage problems, that were having church problems, and that was a counseling center. And there were a lot of relationships that happened. This is why the organization struggled so much with letting the stores go, even though the finances were heading in the wrong direction. Those were such meaningful touch points. The challenge before Lifeway now, and we're facing it, is that we now have to get back in touch with local churches in a way that we weren't before. We've got to be more conversational, more relational, more approachable to church leaders, because the tools and the resources we make that churches buy in bulk really are the engine for Lifeway's mission. So you think about ongoing curriculum and the 1 million plus people every Sunday morning that are using Lifeway's curriculum. That's because we've built a relationship with those churches. And so the good news about the bookstores closing, if there is good news, is that now Lifeway has to direct all of its energy to building up the local church. And that's a good thing, because the local church is God's plan A for fixing and redeeming the world, not bookstores. So there's good news to be had in that.
Let me ask you another personal question about the journey you've been on over these past 2 years. And you have 4 children. What has the journey meant to them, even through the crisis points in your marriage and coming through the counseling out on the other side?
Now, first of all, they made the transition here very well, which was was so good, because had I been in the state I was in and the kids were also struggling, I think the Lord was good to us that they transitioned well, loved their schools immediately, and that was fine. So they, in a way, were healthy, much healthier than us. But I think the kids, that one of the side blessings of having done this counseling journey is that they know about it. And so we have been very open with them. We talk to them about it. The things that we can say. And we just have said to them, as they're all teenagers, you guys are going to have struggles in your marriage. Everybody does. And it's very normal. And so we hope you will get the help that you need when that time does come, because it's not a matter of if, but when. And so, we just have been able to model them imperfection so that they don't get out and get into these marriages and think, well, my parents never fought and we're fighting. And what do we do now? Like we must not love each other like they love each other. So that's been really helpful, that we can say, like, we absolutely love each other, but we're in a hard season.
We are amazed that there is very little training in ministry of how to handle your emotions. What do you do when you're angry? What do you do when you're sad? There are courses for this. Now, I know there's some good counseling stuff that's coming down the pipe, but I was not trained in seminary in that. So as we have conversations as a family about what do you do with anger, those are equipping and important conversations. So we actually do have a printed feelings wheel that we give to our kids when we have family meetings, and everybody has to pick a feeling that they're having and talk at a heart level about a feeling, because it's easier to stay on the surface than it is to get down to the heart of things.
So, and we have 3 teenage boys. So if you ask them, what are you feeling?
Wow.
You're like, oh, we're good. We're good. That's it.
Right. So being in touch with your heart and what's going on in your soul is such an important piece of just being a good human being, let alone a good Christian and a good church leader. So we're learning and growing in all that.
So tell us about some of the shows. So are you dealing with one topic per show? Are you bringing in a person and just seeing where it's going? Or how are you picking those out?
Season 1 that we're about midway through is each episode is about a core emotion that everybody feels, but it's uniquely felt in pastoral ministry. So for example, one is fear. And so there's a whole episode on a pastor who confesses a significant challenge he has with anxiety and challenges he's had along the way of having to get medication and counseling, and fear overcomes him and it creates panic attacks, and he's had to learn to deal with that. Well, that is so freeing to many other pastors and pastors' wives who struggle with the same thing. So fear isn't just something that one pastor struggles with or one person, but lots. There's been other episodes. Is there one you want to comment on?
We just recorded yesterday the one on sadness, and we interviewed a family who lost a child, and it was to a very unexpected situation, an error on the doctor's part. And so, they're processing sadness and also anger. Those things. But what has been so interesting to me is, because coming from Colorado, the majority of our friends from Colorado are unchurched. Well, they're listening to these. because emotions are universal. And so, my neighbor who in Colorado, she also lost a son. And so she can relate to that in some ways that I can't relate to that. And so I think that has been such an interesting thing, is that it's marketed towards pastors and pastors' wives, but really who hasn't felt, hurt or, loneliness. And so doing that has been really fun.
And this is why listening is such a huge, important part of evangelism today, because where you find a wound, you find an open door. I think we may be too focused on getting the right truths in front of people and trying to make sure they're processing cognitively what the gospel means, when the whole thing starts with relationship. And that starts with finding out where people have experienced these hard things in life and get them to open up about it. So yeah, yesterday's conversation on sadness, like we sat there and wept in the podcast studio as they began to unfold the story of what happened with their son, Caleb. So we hope these stories on the Glass House will really resonate with the listeners.
And Lynley made a point that I wanted to ask about. Although the Glass House is specifically targeted to ministers and ministers' wives, these podcast episodes would be applicable to lay people, lay leaders in the church, even non-Christians. Is that correct?
Correct. And really, that's kind of I secretly I guess it's not secret anymore, but secretly.
Yes, we got the scoop. We told the secret.
Hope that it is more almost the lay people who hear it, because fellow pastors and pastors' wives, they all kind of know how this goes. But I think it's interesting, the lay people hearing it, because they may not realize some of the things that their pastors are struggling with. And so, I wish that we could market it a little bit more to the person who is sitting in the congregation every Sunday and doesn't really know how to connect with their pastor, or doesn't know what they struggle with.
Absolutely.
And I think that, our audience will be that one for you, because they are always looking for ways to know their pastor better and to be able to help. And I agree. I do think the more that this can filter through and people can think about it, because it brings your own issues to life, but you also think about the people that you're maybe not caring for as much as you could do little things to make a difference, or you could just be aware. I love what you said about listening. How many times do we run through life and just we look at people, but we don't really look, and we don't really see, and we don't really look in their eyes. And to think, if we could pay more attention to each other, the difference, all those conversations and the relationships, and how many things would just be different,
Yeah.
Okay, for both of you, real quick, if you had known then in Colorado what you know now in Nashville and all that has transpired over the past 2 years, would you have made the move?
Oh, that is a hard question.
Save the best for last.
I'm going to be unusually honest here. I would not have made the move. Now I'm glad that we did it now, but had I known how painful it was going to be then, I would not have done it, because it hurt. I mean, it still hurts. We can't even express to you how much we miss the people of our church in Colorado. We still miss them every day. And
our neighbors.
We just love the people so much. And I would say that we feel very called. We are here because God has called us here, but
because we turned it down like 3 times. We just said, no, we're settled. We just bought a building. We just built a building. You have the wrong person. Like, we are not them. And the Lord kept convicting us after we turned it down. So
it's not comfortable. I don't think it will ever be comfortable, but I don't think God calls us to comfort. He calls us to be faithful. I will always feel like I'm a pastor at heart, and Lifeway doesn't need a pastor. Lifeway needs a president with a pastor's heart. So I'm learning what that means and what that looks like in terms of leading and giving direction and loving people with a pastor's heart, but also understanding they have their own pastors. They go to church. They need to have a connection at their local church level. But I would be lying if I said that. Both of us miss very deeply just how close you get to people when you're in the life of a local church with them. It's just very special and very close. And I miss that. But we're learning this new dance, and we're learning it every day.
Well, tell us
You didn't answer the question though. I don't know what would you have said yes?
I would agree with what he said. I was going to say ditto. the same. But yes, so, I mean, just because it was a hard transition. We didn't leave because of a bad situation. The church was so healthy and going so well. So we were really surprised that that this happened. But like we've said earlier, I mean, had we not, it wasn't near as healthy as we thought it was. So I am glad we moved, but it was hard.
Yeah.
Well, tell us how we can find the podcast.
The Glass House is found anywhere you find podcasts, whether that's on the Apple podcast store or other places. Just type in The Glass House, Ben and Lynley Mandrell. You can also follow me on social media. I'm always dropping the episodes on there, on Instagram or Twitter. But we hope that you'll hop on and listen and share it with your friends. Almost every episode, I think as you're listening to it, you'll think of someone who needs that message or that conversation. And so we hope you'll pass it on to people who really need that kind of encouragement right now because they're walking through a tough time emotionally.
Thank you. And thanks for what you're doing.
You bet. It's great to be here.
Thanks for having us.